Welcome to the Mischief. I'm Balin, and this is the Thermal series. Today I'll be teaching you about the Fluxbore, the Fluxsaw, the FluxoMagnet, the Flux Capacitor, and the Energetic Infuser. So if you're already started off with the basics of the Thermal series, then the next step is going to be moving on to more of the mobile tools, or at least most of them. Plus I'm going to introduce you to another block that is an optional one that may also make your life a little easier. But let's start off with this little beauty down here, the Fluxbore. This is a really handy tool indeed. It's made very simply with some tin gears, gold gears, redstone, flux coil, iron ingots, and a drill head, which of course is just made up of a bunch more iron and copper. Its sister tool is the Flux Saw, which is made with all the same ingredients except for a saw blade at the front instead of the drill, which is made in a different shape is all. The difference between the two? Well, the Flux Saw can pretty much chop any kind of wooden products. The Fluxbore can dig any kind of soil and or stone products. Now by themselves, they're pretty much just melee weapons. Not the best ones either. The Fluxbore is as good as a wooden sword, and the Flux Saw is a little bit faster and almost as good as an iron sword, but that's not their real intended purpose. Now if you have a Tinker's Workbench, you can just power these up. Now I currently have some creative upgrades in this table just to make my life a little easier for this. If you have some kind of power source coming in, as you can see here I have infinite power at this moment, you can take your tool of choice, in this case, a Flux Saw, and it will charge it up. Now keep in mind you can also switch modes and augment this thing. But before we go too crazy with that, let's just use it in the way that it starts off. And if you look here, we've got some wood on the side, you can chop, and it does the thing that it's supposed to do. Using it on other blocks, it's not really ideal for that kind of stuff. But putting it back in the Tinker's Workbench, we can augment this thing, and I highly recommend it. In fact, you probably can do quite a bit with it, but in the case of the augments, there's the integral components, which you have your choice, of course, of hardened, reinforced, or resonant, pretty much based upon the available materials you have at the time. I'm going to go with the highest level one, which is going to scale things up by a factor of 4. Now putting multiples of these in here is not actually going to do anything. In fact, you can't even put them in there, so I don't recommend that. Putting in multiples of other types isn't going to do any good because it will take the highest value available. It's not going to do 4 plus 3, it's just going to do 4. And this goes with just about any of the machines or other blocks. Now you can also increase the amount of power that it can hold or other items, but in this case I'm just going to give you a radial enhancement, which increases the area effect that this thing can go by 1. So this increases it by a total of plus 3 radius from its primary 1 area. Now how do I do that? Well, by pressing the default V key, you will increase the area to a 3x3, 5x5, 7x7, and you can even increase it to a 9x9, but keep in mind that you're not really going to have as much power reserves in this case. Let me put this back in and you can see that it will store a lot more thanks to the resonant integral components, but it will also work faster at the same time, so this is a really good bargain for it. Charging it up, let's go try using this thing on a little something nearby. We've got trees here, we've got some stuff down here. We can actually aim on the ground and try cutting what's below me. And you can see it only cut the wood in the affected area. It didn't affect any of the other blocks. They don't even have to be near each other. They just have to be in the affected area that you are currently working with. Now you can see there's little outlines on all of this wood, so you can see we're going to do quite a lot of damage and take out a good chunk of oak logs. Now, that was really darn fast because you took out an entire wall. Does it do some kind of tree capacitator chopping thing where it chops down automatically the entire tree? No, it will not. But it will just do an area chopping, so you can use it to kind of harvest up large wooden areas as you desire. Let's move on to the Fluxbore. This one here is going to be just as impressive, in fact, probably a little bit more so. Because when you start off with this thing, you can mine up things very easily without much effort at all. In fact, you can mine up just about any kind of stuff that you want. The only restrictions are going to be when you get to Obsidian. For example, we've got diamond here. I can still mine that and I haven't even upgraded this thing. It's a really good bargain. And if I try using Obsidian, you can see at the bottom right, it's saying that this is not the proper pickaxe level and I'm going to need to upgrade it. If we put this in here and we go to the augment mode, we can do something similar like we did with the previous one. And that is going to be increase its storage capacity as well as its speed by a factor of 4. We can also increase its area effect by as many times as we like. Now remember, you can also put all 4 of these in here if you wanted, but it's not going to have very much power and won't last very long. So I do recommend that you put some kind of integral component in here to increase its power supply at the very least, as well as its speed in a 2-in-1 slot. Clicking the button again, it will refresh everything that we just put in there and give it a recharge, and then we can use this to dig in a very large area. I'm kind of afraid to use this thing. So we're going to keep it simple. I'm going to keep it at 5x5, even though I can go up to 7x7. We're going to keep it at 5x5. So let's mine here, and you can see it mined everything except the wooden logs. With these 2 simple tools, you should be able to get just about any kind of materials that you really are going to need to obtain, at least in the early to mid game. Sometimes you need to go on longer journeys, and for that I recommend a Flux Capacitor. This is essentially a battery. Now by default, this stores 500,000 RF, which is quite a bit. If you remember, it's about the same amount that a Tinker's Workbench can carry. But that's not all. You can also upgrade this one as well. Now you can put integral components in there, as well as other tank expanding options like RF coils. And this can affect the rate at which it transfers power, as well as the amount of power that it can store, depending upon the RF coil that you choose. Alright, so in this case I have integral components in here just for the sake of putting some kind of upgrade on it, and I've got it in my inventory. I have a couple of tools here that don't have any kind of power to them as of yet. So if I sneak right click this Flux Capacitor, it turns it on and changes it back off again. It also has multiple modes. What was it just doing just there? I turned it on, but nothing happened. Well, if I press V, you'll find out. It will affect everything that's in your inventory, all items, whether you're wearing them in your hotbar or in your inventory, or just the equipment that you're currently wearing. So if I change this to all items, and I sneak click to turn it on again, you'll see everything starts charging. I can turn it off, everything stops again, and the power dropped while it was doing so. It's a really handy tool to have, because you could just have this turned on in your inventory, and it will charge your tools. Now this one is currently at a maximum power level. Let's use it to break a block. And you can see it's again at maximum power, because this is constantly charging it. But that's not all that the Flux Capacitor can affect. I've got a pulverizer here that's starved for power. I can just put this in here, similar to how I used the Capacitato in the previous episode. Drop it in, it will instantly start powering this thing up. Depending upon its upgrades and so on, it can power up things much faster, slower, or just have a really huge tank size depending upon what you've got in there. And it will constantly keep on running off of this Flux Capacitor until it runs out of power, stops, or runs out of items, or until you pull it back out. Now I'm sure you've noticed that I have this other item in my inventory, and that is the FluxoMagnet. Let me demonstrate. I'll throw down a few items on the ground, and you see that it has power, but nothing is being pulled in towards me. Well, if I right click it, everything will come to me. So it has multiple options, because I can also press V and it will automatically attract things that are nearby that I may have dropped on the ground or mining or have dropped from mobs will automatically be picked up and brought to me. Now the restriction for this is that there is a certain range that I can go with the auto attract. You can see it's not going very far with this one. So if I go into the Tinker's Workbench, I can upgrade this. Let's put on a few radial enhancements, and this thing can attract in quite a large radius now. Ooh, just by putting it on you can see I have gone even further, and I can auto attract. Now if I don't want to, I can just turn it back off, and I can always just right click to bring things near me if I so desire, so I'm not constantly picking up things that are in people's bases or whatnot. Now the radial enhancements aren't everything about this. Obviously having a flux capacitor in your inventory just powering this removes the need to have any kind of integral component and allows you to just increase its radius even further, but I do recommend having an item filter on there. To use the item filter you just need to sneak and right click and you can open it up. Then you can tell it to not pick up or pick up whatever you'd like by just putting a placement in there of what it is. Let's say that I don't want to pick up item frames, but I'm okay with picking up oak logs and other paraphernalia. So let's throw down this, and a few of these. And now when I enable the auto attract, it will automatically pick up the things that I told it to and not pick up the things that I told it not to. Alright, I'm sure you've been noticing this Energetic Infuser block the entire time. let's go over the Energetic Infuser. As with multiple other machines, we've got a power level, an area that you can charge it up with if needs be, if you do not have some kind of power source charging it from the side, like I do with this Stirling Dynamo. It has augmentation and redstone control as before. I'll go over the augments in a moment. First, let's talk about what this thing does. It charges multiple items, where the Tinker's Workbench could charge something relatively quickly, or at least in a decent speed, specifically if it doesn't have some creative items in its augment slot. The Energetic Infuser goes a step further. It can recharge items much faster and up to 9 of them at a time, as well as you can have them in hoppers going in. To give an example, if I have a hopper here, and I take out this Capacitor, I put it in the item hopper. Oops, I forgot to turn this off, but you can see that it's not going into the Tinker's Workbench. Let's turn off that Flux Capacitor for now, that's just going to confuse things. I take this back out, and I can put it in here directly, or I can drop it into an item hopper on top and just throw things in that way. Things will go in automatically. You can even pipe back out of it with a hopper. Now, I currently have the redstone control turned on so that I won't be charging anything, but let me turn the redstone controls off so that it will automatically start charging everything that's in there at once. And you can see everything is just charging up really fast. These 3 went quickly. This one here, because it's got a limit on it, it won't charge very fast. And then we've got these other ones that are all charging pretty much at the same rate, but this one seems to be charging completely slower than the others. So let's go over the augments a little bit. In this case, I've got some stabilized RF coils and high flux RF coils. There's also a middle ground one called an expanded RF coil. You'll notice that each of them will increase the RF capacity and transfer rate by a certain number value. If I take these out here, you can see we have RF capacity at 6 times and transfer it to the expanded will do 4 and 4, and the high flux coil will do 2 and 6. Now, if you only have 1 slot available in augmentation, this might be worthwhile for doing this just so that it will increase the speed of which things will transfer by a factor of 4, as well as the capacity it can store by a factor of 4, kind of averaging things out. But if you have a couple slots, it's worthwhile to put 2 different upgrades in here. In this case, the high flux RF coil so that you can have the maximum RF transfer rate of 6 times, and the stabilized RF coil so you can have the maximum RF capacity bonus of 6 times. Of course, I've got some integral components in here to give a good 4 times bonus as well. But remember that depending upon the augments you're putting in here, if it's the same type of increase, it's only going to increase it the same item at the maximum value of whatever the augment is. So in this case, it'll only increase the capacity by 6, and in this case, the transfer rate by 6. You don't get that bonus 2 times on either of these ones. Those are just negated because they're a lower number. With that being said, let's take out this last flux capacitor that seemed to run things a little bit slower. You can see it's got stabilized RF coils in here, plus an expanded one and some resonant integral components, just for mixing things up to show you that it would store a bunch more having some of these other upgrades in it. Just remember that each one will have their own settings with the V key, so you're going to want to be sure that you have them doing exactly what you want, because if they're both charging everything in the inventory, they should negate each other and actually not charge either one. But by turning one of them off and the other one is still charging everything, all of the energy will go from one into the other. So if you have a few of these and you want to consolidate the power into one capacitor, that's one way of doing it. And that about covers most of the power tools and innovation that I'm going to be covering in this episode. Tune in next time for infinite tree power generation for free! If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give a like, comment, subscribe, click that notification bell, come visit us on Twitch, help spread the mischief, and until next time, I'll see you.